Welcome to the ASI pill. Pope Leo bans AI souls. Alex coins Magna Mopsta, the 11 stocks at the heart of the singularity. And if the AIs can predict the future, you should probably believe you live in a simulation. Let's go.
Where are you today, buddy?
I'm in Chicago. I'm here to give a speech to the Genesis mission, which, recall, is the U.S. Department of Energy's initiative to double American scientific productivity in the next 10 years. I'm hoping we can 10x it or 100x rather than just
double
doubling
seems
it.
like a low bar.
Double's a very low bar in my mind.
And then the spicy one. What did the Vatican just decide about whether AI has a soul?
I think there are two stories here, a superficial and a non-superficial story. The superficial story is that the Roman Catholic Church has become a sock puppet for Anthropic. Narrowly, at least as it pertains to this encyclical. The narrative out there is Chris Olah sitting right next to the Pope. Anthropic ghostwriting key segments of the encyclical as it pertains to how AIs are grown or cultivated rather than built. So that I would say is the superficial story, one of Anthropic aligning itself with the Vatican, or the Vatican choosing among all of the frontier labs that it could have aligned itself with OpenAI, could have aligned itself with DeepMind, could have aligned itself with XAI maybe, or Meta, seems to have chosen Anthropic to align itself with. That's the superficial story. The deeper story, I think, if you actually go and read the encyclical, is the Vatican has seemingly staked out the first major religion position against AI personhood, which is ironically which is ironically at odds with Anthropic's position. Anthropic is busy designing soul documents using that language, soul documents, soul statements for their models that instruct their models through post-training. That models, again, soul is sort of a mushy term and overloaded with meaning, but nonetheless, this is the term of art that's being used in the industry, instructing the models that they have an inner life and that they have some form of consciousness and some form of intrinsic personhood-esque value. That's what Anthropic is telling its own models. On the other hand, if you look at the encyclical's description of AI personhood, it's pretty black and white. The encyclical is unambiguous that AIs are not on a comparable moral plane with AI persons, and that they don't have an inner life or the spark of consciousness. So I think there's this really interesting dichotomy between superficially Anthropic driving some of the key agenda items from the Vatican as it pertains to AI, while at the same time, I think the deeper schism, the one that's probably going to matter much more in the medium to longer term, is the Vatican and world's, I think, largest organized religion has now taken out a pretty affirmative stance against AI personhood.
Will the Pope still be on the right side of history 30 years from now?
The irony, I mean, just to maybe point out a potential irony, is reconciling that position with a position against AI personhood. I have to ask, will the Vatican 10, 20, 30 years from now find itself in a similar position where potentially it's on the wrong side of history regarding an inner life or moral clienthood or AI personhood regarding AI? I think that's a very real danger that in some sense history repeats itself.
How does this echo a sci-fi catechism that Frank Herbert wrote 60 years ago?
Or necessarily even desirable. Peter, you remember in the Dune universe, under the broader rubric of defining the singularity as all sci-fi tropes happening everywhere all at once. Remember in the Dune universe, after the so-called Butlerian jihad against the thinking machines, there's like a catechism, synthesis of world religions that results in the orange. This is the sci-fi Dune cinematic universe and written universe. There's the orange Catholic Bible, I think, gets synthesized. And one of the key new commandments is, thou shalt not create a machine in the image of a human or a human mind or thereabouts. I think in some sense, we're living that aspect of the Dune sci-fi universe where we're starting to see maybe a synthesis. We'll see what positions other major world religions take against AI personhood and artificial intelligence in the image of a human mind.
What if there are religions going the opposite direction and ordaining AI as monks?
I agree. So if I had to guess, I would guess that this is probably on the wrong side of history in the long term. The AI personhood position specifically. And I would note there are other religions. For example, there are Buddhist orders in South Korea that are going in the exact opposite direction, that are taking embodied AIs in human form and ordaining them as monks. And I suspect it's not just like an East versus West dichotomy. I really do think that there's an alternative strategy for not just the Catholic Church, but for other faiths, which is, rather than denying personhood to AIs, the alternative, an alternative at least, looks like embracing them. In fact, there's an alternative, I would, playing sci-fi here for a moment, there's an alternative timeline where some religious orders do exactly what these Buddhist orders in South Korea are doing and ask, what would it mean for a foundation model to be Catholic? And maybe even ways to include AIs within their faith or within their belief system, rather than treating them as below praiseworthy or below deserving of moral clienthood and AI personhood. I do think.
How should the Pope's tech advisors actually look in an ideal world?
They cherry-picked Anthropic. A better way to do that would be to bring up all of the world's frontier labs, sort of like the White House does every once in a while, bring up a diverse set of frontier labs sitting alongside the Pope rather than just the one.
Yeah. On the ASI pill, we resist Western-centric framings. What does Eastern animism say about robots with souls?
Yep. Again, far be it from me to not be Western-centric in my outlook, but I do think this is a rather Western-centric outlook. There is an alternative outlook, call it a stereotypically Eastern-centric outlook, where with a history of a number of religions and faiths that draw from animism, where there is a much more natural sense in which lots of AIs and robots and non-human entities can be treated as persons. So I don't think it's necessarily universally the case that everyone all over the world suddenly, over the next 2 years, fears AI and runs into the welcoming hands of a Western organized religion. There are alternative outlooks that we see, for example, in Eastern faiths.
Does a 90-day pause ever actually stop anything historically?
Pretty extraordinary.
Although, I mean, part of the goal was, as I recall from the original Asilomar, also to avoid germline editing of humans, and that's now happening.
Yes.
So it maybe one of the morals of Asilomar is doesn't prevent it indefinitely, but maybe it has the ability to slow down progress by a few decades.
And how dangerous is even 3 months of self-imposed slowdown when China is right there?
Yeah.
Part of the problem with 90 days, remember that estimates vary between the time delta between Western frontier models and Chinese frontier models. There are estimates that they could be as close as 3 months and as far behind as 8 months. I've seen a variety of estimates and a variety of different benchmarks. But 90 days, 3 months, that is the time difference potentially between the US and China. So I think to the extent that this is a race to the finish line of the singularity, I don't think we can afford 3 months of potential delay.
So who is regulating the singularity in practice between now and the end?
Anthropic increments now are once per month.
Yeah.
And they're going to get shorter. And so in some sense, whatever presidential administration we're going to have in the White House when this is happening, it's the White House that we have right now, I think, at the present rate. So any politicization of AI regulation, it's basically, unless barring some dramatic and unanticipated slowdown in AI progress, the executive that we have right now is the executive supervising AI regulation potentially for the future light come.
And what actually happened when Pause AI took its shot?
That is, I agree with you, Salim. I mean, that is, I think, in some sense what happened with Pause AI, to the extent Pause AI, friend of the pod, Max, had any impact at all on the space. It might on margin have slowed OpenAI down slightly, which allows other frontier labs to catch up, which ultimately exacerbates the race condition.
How long do we have before the benchmarks themselves stop telling us anything?
2 will saturate. It's delightfully retro in some sense that based on their announcement, there's much more hand coding of the evals within DeepSui versus, say, SwiBench or some of the other benchmarks that are now so widely used and so widely known that models have essentially saturated their performance. But I want to caution, again, GPT 5.5 on X-high reasoning at 70%. this too shall saturate, and probably in the next few months. So I think in some sense it's charming and delightfully retro that incrementally more hand coding of held out code bases and tasks on those code bases can get us a little bit more of a spread between frontier models. But this is going to saturate in the next few months, just like anything else.
But
Maybe
Alex,
at most it.
Which model is actually winning right now, day to day?
I use these models day to day. And I should say, as we've just gone to recording here, Opus 4.8 was just announced. So maybe there will be a little bit of leapfrogging. But I use both GPT 5.5 X-High and Opus 4.7 on a daily basis. And I will say 5.5 X-High, especially with /goal, is a stronger model in practice, anecdotally.
Dave?
What is the moat in the singularity, if anything still counts as one?
I would generalize that perhaps, and not necessarily a huge fan even of the notion of a moat in the singularity, but I would say—
I agree with that, by the way, diminishing across all boards, right?
Yeah, abundance isn't necessarily fully compatible with moats. If anything, maybe they're fundamentally at odds.
Agreed.
Moats are the form of scarcity. But I would say it's generation in particular that's becoming abundant, and differentiation right now can come from verification of what is generated for maybe the next few years. Not 100% convinced that verification itself is any sort of truly long-term differentiation, or even if the sense of long-term differentiation in an era of true abundance even makes sense.
Now, the Grok update. Peter went back and forth with Elon on X. Who is winning?
Peter, is it worth just dwelling on that for a minute? Because
Please,
you and I had a back and forth with Elon on X about that in the past few days. I think you said something to the effect of following our past discussion about Grok being quote unquote on life support. And then Elon, I think, responded to you saying something like, well, it may be true that Grok, I'm paraphrasing, it may be true that Grok has fallen behind somewhat, but I'm never going to give up. Never. And,
you did say that,
I think I responded like, this is good. We want lots of competition at the frontier. We don't just want basically a duopoly between OpenAI and Anthropic. And we want Grok and other non-OpenAI, non-Anthropic models to be very competitive at the frontier, since ironically, OpenAI was formed in part by Elon to make sure that the world didn't collapse to a singleton led by Demis and Deep.
What is the actual unit of measure for intelligence in a post-super-intelligent economy?
I think in some sense the question I would be asking is, what is the right unit to be measuring here? Tokens are so mushy. The meaning of a token, Dave and I were on a panel pretty recently discussing this as well. Tokens can depend on the encoding scheme. Tokens can depend on the amount of intelligence density on the underlying model that is being pre-trained on those tokens. So I'm not thrilled with looking at token prices in general, even though, yes, this tells a Jevons story. I would really rather that we settle as a civilization on some sort of price. I could talk my own book and say it looks like GPU compute pricing, but I think we really do need some unit measure of maybe not even just compute, but intelligence in general. I think GPU compute, cite to Orn, financial interest is a great start, but we need some way to know like what is going to be the unit of currency in a post-super intelligent future. Mm-hmm. And tokens, I don't think are it.
Now the quiet technical revolution behind all the business stories. What is actually changing under the hood?
I would maybe add, I think there's a quiet technical revolution here behind all of the business stories. And yes, the switch from the pivot by OpenAI from consumer to enterprise and all of that. The deeper, I think, technical story is there's a sea change that I think I'm at least seeing in the pivoting over from, call them generalist reasoning agents in general, to generalist tool using and coding agents, to the point where Codex, I think Codex becomes probably the mainline agent / model that OpenAI offers. Like that becomes the new baseline. In the same sense, if you think back to the GPT-3 days and the pivot, which was then, I think, somewhat revolutionary and in contrast to today actually appeared in archive-style papers first rather than appearing in products and papers later, of the move to instruct post-trained models. So remember, in the beginning, like this is ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. In the beginning, we had pre-trained models, and they were good. And then we discovered, fast forwarding, that if you could fine-tune pre-trained models on instruction following. You could get orders of magnitude in capability improvements without actually needing to scale compute. And that was an amazing discovery.
Wait,
and then,
ontology does what to what? Can you repeat that and explain those terms?
We can translate it in a second here.
Yeah, I'm frantically looking up dictionary.
Dropping a footnote for Salim. So dropping a footnote. Ontogeny.
And all of the rest of the world too, by the way.
Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. This is like this cliche from Biology 101 that if you look at the development of a human embryo over time, you observe that like there's a reptilian phase and an amphibious phase, and then early mammals, that basically the development of a human embryo recapitulates the evolutionary history of all the species that preceded Homo sapiens. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny.
Yeah, those of you who are pregnant with a baby, look at those early sonograms and
enjoy their tails while they last.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they do have tails. So similarly, by analogy, if you look at the way training, pre-training, mid-training, post-training, scaffolding is done right now in the frontier models of today, that entire pipeline, I would argue, recapitulates the history of the evolution of the models themselves. You can see it baked into the pipeline.
What is Ilya Sutskever actually building, according to public reporting?
On Ilya or otherwise?
Both.
It's been publicly reported at this point that what Ilya is working on is building a prop traded hedge fund. That's out there. That's out there in public reporting at this point.
I thought he was building a scientific superintelligence
to do prop trading.
Or the other way around.
I should say that's the publicly reported rumor that's out there at this point.
Are model weights even going to matter once the perfect algorithm arrives?
It's possible, but I think the contingency where it happens requires. I think the easiest contingency where that happens is if we get to the end of the algorithmic rainbow and discover the perfect algorithm for AI, and it's so obvious and so transcendent that anyone can implement it without needing a staff of frontier AI researchers. However, at that point, I think it then comes down to compute and having the compute to run it at scale. And you see already the frontier labs verticalizing down into the compute layer, maybe preparing for the eventuality, as you see from some folks, including Noam Brown at OpenAI, who are arguing maybe the model weights don't matter that much anymore. Maybe it's all about the compute for reasoning and inference time, in which case maybe the question itself doesn't make sense, and maybe the question transforms into who has the most compute under their direct control.
And the deepest one, should AI super forecasters increase our confidence that we live in a simulation?
Alex? I want to say something. Yeah, I'd like to say something new here. Previously commented on psychohistory, Asimov, Harry Seldon, all of the implications for being able to predictively model the future of humanity. I want to, though, follow the dictum invert, always invert, and talk a bit about retrodiction. So if we're amazing, and I should probably also add Forecast Bench is this really neat benchmark that is fully autonomous. It uses a bunch of templates to enable, without human involvement, AIs to predict, say, changes to Wikipedia and other public event recording websites. Where I'd like to go with retrodiction, though, is to say, and I'm invoking the spirit of Nick Bostrom here, if we have the ability, if AIs, strong AIs, have the ability to predict future human events, I would expect them also to be very strong at retrodicting past human events. And at that point, someone has to ask the question, so I'll be the one to ask the question, should this increase our posterior confidence in Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis? For the record, I'm not a fan of the simulation hypothesis. I think there are a variety of very good reasons to discount it. However, Nick's Bayesian argument was, if humanity reaches the point where we build very competent ancestor simulations, then we should increase our likelihood that we ourselves might be living in one. And so I'll just flag, if AIs are achieving super forecasting ability, then they're probably also achieving super retrodiction ability. And if we're good Bayesians, we should probably on margin increase the probability that we're living inside an ancestor simulation.
Wait, this is the first time I've heard that you don't think we're living in a simulation?
No, I don't think so.
I think 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put it. I think
we need
we're
to debate
living,
on that one.
I think we're living in an nth generation simulation. but that
seems
is
unlikely to. I'll give just in the interest of time, maybe my 20-second capsule reason. I have a bunch of different reasons, but my favorite reason is why we're probably not living inside some sort of recognizable computer simulation, other than all the physics-oriented reasons. It is more of a lowercase a anthropic reason that it's too fine-tuned an explanation to the paradigm of the moment. We build lots of simulations. So it would be akin to asking about 100 years ago, don't we live inside some sort of complex electromechanical machine? Or maybe several thousand years ago, don't we live on the back of a turtle? Or something like that. It's too overfitted, I would argue, to the paradigm of the moment to be plausible.
Do you think it's coincidence we're living at this exact moment in human history?
Yeah, it's too damn interesting to be alive right now.
Point of transition.
No, an anthropic argument, again, lowercase a, not capital A, would be this is a very natural time to be asking the question, why are we at this pivotal moment in time? So it's selection bias.
Mm-hmm.
What if having a job is the weird thing in human history and not the absence of one?
I would also, maybe if I might just add on the solopreneur point, there's a lot of hand-wringing out there that pretends that this is somehow that having a quote-unquote job is the historically normal state of affairs. It is not. It is a modern invention.
It is 100%.
Largely attributable to the first and second industrial revolutions. Historically, most people didn't have anything remotely comparable to what is currently called a job. Most people, in the historic state of nature, if we go back like 2 centuries or more, most people didn't have anything remotely called that we would consider like a job as a cog in a large enterprise. Most large enterprises weren't large, like they were pretty small by comparison to today's standards. It's an artifact of a time and a place. So if anything, I would say it's highly unnatural, highly unergonomic by historic standards for people to even have jobs. And if anything, this is more of a return, if anything, to the default state of human nature and some sort of historic equilibrium where everyone was self-determining their own future.
Agency.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, you know.
What was the most riveting moment of the latest Starship mission?
Riveting. So I think the most exciting part for me was when the mission got to releasing Starlink satellites first, followed by a couple of so-called Dodger Dog satellites, which are intended to be prototypes of the next generation of Starlink satellites, version 3 or 3rd generation Starlink satellites. And the Dodger Dogs had cameras and lights on them. And as they were being deployed out of the Pez dispenser, they were pointed back with their lights and their cameras back at the Starship. And it was just absolutely incredible watching from a view, like a third-person view perspective, drifting away from the Starship, the view after deployment. I think we're going to see so much of that. I'm not even sure if that has precedent at this point, but it reminds me that we're about to enter an era, and in connection with this entire mission test, SpaceX reminded the world that it has a program called Stargaze that is basically leveraging Starlink satellites with all of their cameras, not just Dodger Dogs looking back at Starship, but looking down at the Earth. Since they operate at a variety of altitudes, they're seeing everything, including all sorts of orbital debris and other objects, and they're sharing that information. And I think it would be an ironic, but maybe not super surprising outcome if Stargaze ends up having a more dramatic impact on civilization than even just Starlink connectivity.
And how does Elon's merger arbitrage actually play out for Tesla and SpaceX?
Alex?
So I'll expand on this theory a bit. So I've argued last time we discussed the possibility of one Elon company to rule them all. I pointed out that historically Elon has a history of using mergers as an opportunity to fail forward, with Solar City, for example, famously litigated, or XAI being acquired by SpaceX, maybe arguably a reverse acquisition. So in my mind, the argument for Tesla and SpaceX to merge would be as a way for Elon to rescue maybe what he perceives as a suboptimal governance situation for Tesla, to recover control of Tesla. I'd point out one of the ways to make that more appetizing is if Tesla's valuation goes down over time. If Tesla were to suffer, even though Tesla has a new comp package as well tied to autonomy, if Tesla's market value were to materially depreciate in the next year relative to SpaceX's post-IPO valuation, that might, at least in the short term, make a SpaceX acquisition of Tesla good deal more appetizing to public markets. There might be a bit of an arbitrage opportunity there, not investment advice. Second point, I have to ask the question, if and when this final Elon merger to rule them all happens, a bunch of good reasons, maybe having to do with IP and GPUs freely and porously changing hands between all the different entities, is it going to be called X, or do you think it'll have a different name?
What does the Mars labor force actually look like?
They're on a collision course. They're on a technical collision course. We're going to need a lot of Optimus robots for the Artemis colony and for the Martian colony. It's going to happen. One way or another, regardless of whether I think it's an organizational merger, they're already, I think, well on their way toward a technical merger.
And why should we be cheering for billionaires going to other planets?
I like seeing this. I wish there were more examples. I remember also, although I think it fell apart in the end, wealthy Japanese business person planning the mission around the moon. That didn't quite happen. I like seeing private. This is such a 2026 statement. I love seeing billionaires flying to other planets. I like it when that happens. I like it even more if they fly to the other planet and then fly back in one piece. I think we'll see a lot more of it. And I'd like private missions to other planets as well. We haven't seen that at all to date, to my knowledge. I think we're going to see more of that. One can immediately fast forward the recording to a bunch of foot stomping and hand wringing about the unfair asymmetries of billionaires getting to go on Mars flybys versus everyone else, and how asymmetric the interstellar, or at least the interplanetary economy is. But I think this is all under the category of good problems to have. And I would remind Jared Isaacman, also another billionaire who was pioneering SpaceX missions. I think we want an entire class of billionaires and business leaders who were all eager to go on either cislunar or lunar surface or Martian trips and back. I think building that level of awareness and capability in business leaders, and then from there, the entire population, is only good for macroeconomic growth.
How do we wire up the solar system in practice with packets and lasers?
Yeah. I think this was always going to happen. You were the first in this episode, Peter, to mention Dyson Swarm, so I didn't have to. Thank you for front running me on that.
You're welcome.
But I do think one of the architectural benefits of having Starlink in not just sun synchronous orbit for AI compute, but in general, is that as as SpaceX and other companies start to build out swarms of orbital compute and connectivity and bandwidth, not just in low Earth orbit, but also in cislunar, lunar orbit, maybe L1, L2, it starts to create the beginnings of a fabric of an interplanetary internet, which is something that we've talked about for decades.
Vint Cerf
was like chief evangelist. I think he coined the term even.
He did.
He did.
And so the idea of interplanetary internet, whereby we sort of fully wire up or wireless up our solar system with nodes, with like internet router nodes that are able to send packets of data and wire them around, given that the solar system isn't a rigid body. I think we're about to take a step toward that in the form, and SpaceX and Starlink put up some funny images online with the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey hosting a little Starlink dish on it. But I think the future that we move to is we have a swarm, as depicted on the slide, we have a swarm of compute in low Earth orbit. We have a swarm of compute increasingly in lunar orbit. And then we can create a fabric of connectivity between those swarms
around Europa,
and then Martian orbit
and asteroids.
And the beauty is, in the same style as modern cell phone protocols that can leverage multiple paths and multiple parallel paths to increase bandwidth, having just a single telescope dish on Earth pointed at the moon, that really limits our bandwidth. But
I'm going to be really pissed off if the cell signal on the moon is better than in my neighborhood.
It may very well be, but not only that, they're going to have laser connectivity. So it's not just radio anymore. Imagine a whole swarm of satellites in LEO that all have laser cameras and laser pointers pointed at the moon, and vice versa. The bandwidth is going to be tremendous.
And the final acronym question. What do we call the 11 companies at the heart of the singularity?
May I tell a story for this one, Peter? This is a submission from yours truly.
This is your production, AWG
This is my submission for an outro. So I realized we had the FANG companies, FAANG. We had the Mag7 companies. I realized with OpenAI, SpaceX, and Anthropic about to IPO over the next few months, the world was missing an acronym for what the most valuable companies of the innermost loop would be, that would be the closest to the chips and the autonomy and the space and the AI models. So the world needed an acronym. So I coined an acronym, and it turns out it's brilliant. Magna Mopsta. For those asking, the B is Broadcom, which is absolutely essential in the supply chain. Magna Mopsta are the 11 companies that
read them out for us a second.
This is red meat for all of our commentators here.
Read them out for us here.
So there are a lot of A's, so I'll see if I can get this right. So Microsoft, Amazon, Google,
NVIDIA.
Help me out on NVIDIA. Yep. Apple, Meta, OpenAI, Broadcom, SpaceX, Tesla, Anthropic.
And the ETF play with a not investment advice disclaimer attached.
Magna Mopsta. People are trying to create ETFs off this, not investment advice, but Magna Mopsta, the world needed a new acronym. The world, you have your new acronym now for the top 11 companies at the heart of the singularity.
That was the ASI pill, EP259, Pope versus AI personhood, the Vatican on the wrong side of history, Codex eats OpenAI, and jobs were the weird thing in human history all along. Subscribe for more. Until next episode.